What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's Lumix Live. I've got a bit of a fun, well, I say that often. All the stuff's usually pretty fun to me. But yeah, we have what I think is actually a pretty fun conversation to talk about today, and a couple little demos to show y'all on my GH6 as well as my S5 Mark II that I've got hooked up here into the switcher. So we're going to be able to actually go through and take a look, check out menus, stuff like that. So yeah, this particular setup, obviously as the title says, we're going to be talking about RAW with Lumix cameras. And while that's a bit ambiguous, what we're going to be covering is things like BlackMagic RAW, ProRes RAW, so those are the out over HDMI options for RAW video recording. But then also talk about the RAW stills functionality that we have in the Lumix cameras, take a look at some stuff in Lightroom, some stuff in Premiere, because, well, for one, I'm a Premiere user. If you're a BlackMagic RAW user, obviously this stuff kind of makes a little more sense for maybe DaVinci Resolve, but Premiere at least shows me the tools so I can at least hopefully get some of the information across to you. To preface a little bit about the RAW video conversation side of this, I am by no means an expert on how RAW works or the intricate details of what's actually going on behind the scenes. I know enough, what I would say, enough to be dangerous, and I know that there are a lot of you in the chat that probably have a lot better, actually I know have a lot better experience in color grading and performance in the real world. So this is where this entire platform, the Lumix Live platform, is about the community, and where I can helpfully provide some of the technical information. Know that there are a ton of people in chat that have a lot of real world experience and, you know, ask questions in the chat. Typically, some of those people will answer questions if there's something that maybe I can't get to or I don't know. But I want to at least be able to provide y'all with some of the kind of basic information, how to activate these features, what to look out for, how to work with them from the camera side, and then show you where the tools are located in the software side. So, if this is the first time you've ever joined in on one of these Lumix Lives, these are weekly broadcasts that we do every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, for the most part. And yeah, it's all about you being able to have a conversation directly with Lumix as a brand. If you have a question, as you can see many people are doing, tag at Lumix USA in the chat. It just helps me see it on my side. If you've ever participated in these things, you know how that works. But yeah, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can from all of you today. And then, yeah, as far as topics go, it can be about RAW, it can be about pretty much anything on the Lumix cameras, but we're going to focus pretty heavily on RAW for photo and video for this particular stream. Before we jump into that, I want to remind everybody in the US about Lumix Pro Services. We have Red and Platinum available. Red is free. If you've bought a Lumix camera, get yourself registered on it. You can follow the QR code on the screen. That's how you get your 3-year warranty here in the United States, and you get yourself set up onto the system. So should you ever have a problem with your camera, you're going directly to the Lumix support and not Panasonic Electronics company support lines. If you're someone who prefers to have a much higher level of service, take a look at the Platinum level for our professional services. That is a fee-based program, but that gets you a lot of extra benefits. You get all the same benefits as the Red tier, but you're also getting 2-day repairs with next-day shipping both ways, so if you do have to utilize the service, it's a quick turnaround time. You get a cool welcome kit and a little membership card that's got your number on it and all that kind of fun stuff. But that card also includes the exclusive hotline that you get if you're someone who prefers to speak to people instead of going through email and chat to troubleshoot some problems or escalate an issue that you may be having. You also get 20% off out of warranty repairs, so should you have an incident where maybe you drop the camera, something happens and it's broken, or a lens or whatever, things that aren't typically ever covered under a manufacturer's warranty, you get 20% off out of those repairs if you have to send them in. And then you also get the basics of annual sensor cleanings, firmware updates, kind of all the stuff that you know that you want to use for getting yourself ready for the next season. So I encourage you to take a look at it. Even at bare minimum, get yourself on Lumix Pro Services Red. It is the free tier, so if you've bought a camera, get it. Why pass up on that 3-year warranty that comes with the camera? So, as we said, this is going to be a little more free-flowing. I've got a couple demos to show, but I want to talk to all of you in chat first before we jump into the actual demo. So I see there's been a bunch of comments and questions that kind of came in, so let's kind of run in through this stuff. See, Pete's here, Dennis is here, welcome guys, I've seen you, obviously we've been in here a lot. Intrigue's here. Let's see, GH6 with lens 42.5, the HS043. Can't set linear focus, the option is set to non-linear, and it's grayed out. Lens firmware is 1.2. Is this a bug? So the 42.5, which is the f1.7 model, does not have linear manual focus as far as I've understood. I've tested it. Same thing. In the firmware updates, not all lenses have the hardware required to do linear focusing or linear manual focus. So not necessarily a bug. If the lens doesn't have the hardware, it's not going to be able to add that precision information that the system needs to set linearity for the lenses. I know that if I remember right, I believe the 42.5 f1.2, which is an Octachron, was able to do it, but that is a higher end lens. So yeah, at this point, if it's not doing it, double check the firmware update. We do have the compatibility lists online that do give you some of that information, and as we go through this, I'll reference some of those websites and I'll drop them in the chat as we go through. Let's see here. Marco says, I own 2 GH5s and love them. Would be nice training material in managing Vlog-L and HLG workflow. That is actually something that I've been trying to work on for quite some time now to get together. We do have some videos that go online on the Lumix Global channel in some of the playlists that give you some rough information about how to work with log, or at least how our log profile is designed to be worked with. When it comes to the editing side, obviously that's a little bit more up to some taste, but there are some basic kind of core exposure guidelines that are recommended to follow. First and foremost of those is that if you're on Vlog or Vlog-L, you want to set your midtones or your gray point. So if you're using a color checker, in this case this is a video one, so you'd be using the middle. You want to set that to 42 IRE, and that's going to get you your basically the proper exposure, so you can get maximum dynamic range. For those that have worked in an environment like that, you know that is how you basically then have to take lights or gobos, stuff like that, to shape the lighting and the contrast you want in the scene. Run and gun's a little different. A lot of people will tell you to overexpose by 2 stops. It's not always recommended to do that because your skin tones can shift a little bit when you do things like that. But if you know that you're exposing basically your skin tones to about 42 IRE or your gray point to 42 IRE, you're going to have a properly exposed Vlog piece of footage. HLG is a little different since that's the hybrid log gamma curve there, and I don't really have much experience shooting and exposing in that, so I would have to do a little more research on that for you. Let's see here. Please recommend some applications that process S5 Mark II RW format. So yeah, we are going to be talking about that. I'm going to be using Adobe Camera Raw, which is, in my case, I'm using Lightroom Classic. So the entire Adobe Camera Raw suite does work for processing raw still images. So does Capture One, as long as you're on the newest versions of it. I haven't double checked if the S5 Mark II X has been updated on their setup yet, but we can check on that a little bit later. Dennis says, does the GH6 have the same great implementation of B-RAW that the S5 Mark II X has, with highlight recovery and tons of detail and texture? S52X B-RAW has been a game changer to me. So, obviously it's not publicly out yet. I do have it installed on my camera. Unfortunately, I don't have examples of BlackMagic RAW at this point, since I do not have DaVinci Resolve to actually show examples from. That is something that we are going to work on and try to get, so I can kind of go through some of that stuff for you. But my understanding is that it should be working pretty much the same way that the S5 Mark II and the Mark II X function with BlackMagic RAW. I just have not had the experience yet to actually work with it, put it into software, and confirm, because I don't have the actual final software. Things are always subject to change before the formalized release. What I can tell you is that if you are looking to pick up the update for the GH6 and the Blackmagic RAW support that we are adding to that camera, you want to make sure that you do a couple of things. Follow all of our social channels so that, one, you can get the notification when it's actually released, which is going to be on July 11th. So next week, we will be releasing it out there. Couple things you got to remember. Obviously, you got to update the camera. You also have to make sure that you update the monitor. And you also have to make sure that you are looking at what the recording frame rates are that you want to utilize and using the correct media. One of the things that that has actually been stated about this, and I'm going to switch to my desktop here to show you. One of the things that's been stated, obviously, yes, we are adding Blackmagic RAW to the external recorder over HDMI, so that's going to go to the Video Assist 12G HDR, whether it's a 5-inch or 7-inch. You're getting everything like the 5.7K, you're getting C4K, you get the 4.3K, you get anamorphic functionality, you get a lot of really cool stuff out over HDMI in this update for Blackmagic Video Assist. But I want to make sure that people recognize something here, and that is that the Blackmagic Video Assist is one of the few recorders, if not I think now the only recorder, that does allow you to record to SD cards for the Blackmagic RAW or ProRes, stuff like that. But if you are going to want to do things like 5.7K 60, or you're going to want to do 4K 120, and you're going to want to use a 5:1 compression or less, there is a very strong recommendation that you have to use an external SSD on the recorder to achieve that. When you start talking about bit rates that you're going to end up getting out of the camera at 4K 120 or at 5.7K 60, and you're using those lower compression rates, they're going to push a lot more data through. So if that is something that you want to get the Video Assist for and you want to utilize Blackmagic RAW for, make sure that you're not setting yourself up in a situation where maybe you get to a job, you've been running SD cards in the Video Assist for a while, and then it just stops on you. So make sure you get a good SSD. I believe Blackmagic does provide recommendations. I'm not 100% sure. It's not my company. Don't know. Can't speak to it. But follow the instructions that Blackmagic recommends for compatible media on their recorder for this. But know that in 4K 120, 5.7K 60 or 50p or 4K 100, make sure that you're taking a look at an SSD for your storage out the USB-C port on that recorder. So hopefully that is some good information for you there, Dennis. But yeah, back to the core of the point, it should be the same implementation of as the S5 Mark IIX. They are a very similar generation in processor technology. And that's one of the things that's allowed us to change the way Blackmagic RAW works in the newer cameras, or out of the newer cameras. So what we can send out to the recorders. Let's see here. Rhett, I'm not even going to talk about the first question, Rhett, sorry. It says, when shooting RAW stills on the GH6, do you choose ISO 100 or 800? I actually found that color and dynamic range is significantly better at 800, which makes sense with DR boost. It's going to depend on what you want to shoot with it. So in the photography RAW side of the camera, the thing to remember is that the camera, when it is intelligently selecting the DR boost functionality, is operating in a 16-bit container. So that means that it's using basically more bits to create the image out of it. Whether you shoot 100 or 800, truthfully, in my editing with the files, I don't ever shoot anything from a stills perspective that's going to force me to have to massively press an image. If I have an image that's massively underexposed and I'm trying to get really, really bright highlights, I'm bracketing at that point. And typically, which I think may be a little surprising, is that actually during broad daylight shooting, a lot of times, because if you've followed the stream before and you know the kind of photography that I do, I like shooting faster action, which usually means that my ISO is going to be up much higher. Yes, I love doing landscape work and I like working in that capacity with the camera as well. But usually I am sitting around 640, 800 ISO on pretty much any of my cameras, even if it's broad daylight out. The only exception there being obviously if you're trying to do ultra shallow depth of field in broad daylight, but even in a situation like that, that's where I'm breaking out an ND filter, even in the photography sense. I personally work where I like to get a faster shutter speed to make sure that I'm freezing that motion, and the higher resolution you go in cameras, the more critical that becomes, even with in-body stabilization or electronic stabilization, whatever kind of assist is added to the camera. So as far as stills go, honestly, shoot what works for you. In the different scenes, there is I know this press to say like, hey, you know, I want the most maximum crazy dynamic range you can get out of an image. And while that's true, it's the same logic that you take with lenses. If you buy an f1.8 lens, are you shooting it always at f1.8, or are you using the range of the camera to get the best results for what you're trying to shoot? That's probably the best way I can describe it. Can you get better color at different ISOs? Yeah, sure. But it's going to be up to the shooting scenario that you're in. Landscape shooters love shooting as base ISO as you can, or as low in ISO as you can, especially if you're trying to do longer exposure work. But one thing to remember is that while the GH6 is a hybrid camera, it does lean a bit harder towards the video side. So there are a lot of optimizations made for the video functionality of that camera, where photography is a very strong part of it, but not maybe necessarily the primary use case for it. I love using it because it's got handheld high res, and those RAW files are fun to work with, especially with the noise suppression you get from high resolution, but also from the motion correction that we've got in that camera. So just use the tool the best that works for your kind of shooting. I think it's easy for us to go down a rabbit hole of specs and things like that and lose sight of, well, what are you trying to create? Just create good content, have good story, have good composition, stuff like that, and put the camera into modes that you need to be in. Don't be afraid to use every aspect of what the camera offers you to get an image. Miguel says, is there an official Discord? That's a very good question. We've contemplated opening up a Discord for quite some time now. We know that there are a few that are being run independently from, that we have no involvement in. So I honestly don't know if we would create one. At this moment, I can tell you that we don't have one. We do have the Twitter account. We do have, obviously, Lumix Live. I prefer speaking to people in a more casual sense like this. As much as, we're all, buried into our phones and stuff like that, and Discord is awesome. I use it for a lot of other things. It'd just be a little challenging right at this moment to add a Discord in. But if there's more of you that want to see a Discord, let us know. The more information you let us know about where you want us to be so that you can interact with us, the little bit easier it is for me to pitch opening one of those accounts. Let's see here. Tommy says, hi, Sean. Quick question here. Is the S5 Mark IIX an ISO invariant camera? So the S5 Mark IIX relies on dual native ISO circuitry. So that means that you have two native ISO points, which means if you were to take an image in the camera at 100 ISO and then boost in post up to 640 or 800 in the standard color mode, you're going to get somewhat similar results if you then boost it in post. If you try to take a 100 ISO image and then boost it to 6400 ISO, doesn't work that way. You'd have to go to start on the second or the high gain circuitry for getting that next step in the way the gain works. So there are differences there. It makes it a little more complicated to work with a camera when you're not, if you're exposing and shooting in that method for protecting highlights. But ultimately, the core of it is the S5 Mark II and Mark IIX and basically the S1 series, save for the S1R, have dual native ISOs. And they're going to change depending on the color profile that you're in. Let's see here. Thank you, YouTube. Jumping chat again. Okay. Let's see here. James says, will there ever be an option to record RAW externally as well as internal recording option? At this moment, probably not. The process that you have to go through to produce a RAW output signal over HDMI is what makes it impossible to record a processed image inside the camera at the same time. If you think about this in the logic of like proxies, proxies you would say be shooting in ProRes, and then you want a lower resolution or a lower bitrate version of that as a proxy file, because in some cases it can be easier to work with because you're working on that and then just applying your edits to the higher res component of your footage. When it comes to RAW, the camera is doing basically everything to just take that image, send it out over the HDMI, and send the data. It's actually not even the image, it's just sending the data out. So there's no processing going on. And in cameras now that you see that are doing HDMI out RAW, or even doing internal RAW, they typically, and I can't say this for every camera because I don't know every camera, but most of the time you're not getting a processed version at the same time. The processor workload is fairly heavy at that point. And you're working with more compact travel ready cameras that have a lot of these capabilities but may not have the full blown horsepower that you would need to do all of it at once. So hopefully that answers your question, James. Let's see here. I think that says Drunkass. Do you have a recommendation for ND filters and mist filters? I'm still rocking my your G7. I would heavily recommend checking with those in chat. I don't shoot enough with higher end stuff for any kind of ND filters or stuff like that. I know Dennis is probably going to roll his eyes, but I use... sorry to call you out there, Dennis. I know you and I laughed about this a little bit in one of the streams. I have a Tiffin variable ND filter. I come from the photographic background, so for me, they work perfectly fine. As far as mist filters, I usually don't use any kind of mist filters, but I'm sure there's someone in chat that can give you some good recommendations. Let's see here. Cliff says, in photo, auto aperture response speed is fast. In video, auto aperture opens and closes very slowly. Can the response speed be changed in video? That is a very good point, Cliff. In the photography side, the reason why aperture changes, like if you're in shutter priority or program or any of those modes, the reason the aperture responds incredibly fast is because it can. You're not recording the images that happen between the aperture changing, so as it's moving from point A to point B. In the video side, for the longest time, camera companies across the board and lens manufacturers across the board have been criticized relentlessly about stair-stepping in the aperture control on lenses. So the reason you don't see it is because there has been a very strong drive to get lenses to perform more like a cinema-style lens. So you get a smooth aperture transition, or you get a bloom as the exposure changes. This is why it doesn't snap in and out of aperture change, because then in the video, because you're recording 24, 30, 60, 120 frames per second, all of those frames between when the aperture is changing, you want them to blend smoothly. You don't want it to snap in the exposure shift. At least that is because of the feedback we've gotten from the community, and I know a lot of other people in other companies and other lens manufacturers, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure everyone's gotten the same pushback from everybody when we were using photographic lenses in a video sense. So let's see here. Tommy says, speaking of Lumix Pro Services, I've registered several new cameras since May of last year and still nothing in the mail. Okay, Tommy. We can take a look at that. One of the first things I've been told is to, apologize if you've already done this. Check spam folders, check, if you use Outlook, check Clutter. I recently learned that Clutter catches a lot of stuff that I'd never thought it should collect, and can cause some challenges there for just getting emails from us. But also at that point, I can poke our service team to see if they're backlogged on pro service requests. Tommy else says, any tips on going through airport security with a camera? Don't want to have my S52X in checked luggage, but I'm worried about X-rays and heavy lead curtain can do to the camera. Yeah, there's not really anything you got to be worried about. I check my cameras. I run them through the security X-ray. Truthfully, if you were to approach a TSA agent in the United States and say, I don't want to put my camera through the checked or through the X-ray machine, they're probably going to give you a hassle. So yeah, at that point, it's really up to you. If you're not comfortable with it, tell them you're not comfortable with it. I've never had a problem with it, and I've been doing this for well over decade and a half at this point, from film to digital. Even in the film era, I just kind of followed the basics. Usually try to just not really worry about it. And I've not really ever had a problem. Actually, I can say I've never had a problem with it. Let's see here. Lumix lenses have smooth ramping, aperture, and video. Sigma lenses are smooth in manual dial turning, but stair step and auto exposure. What causes this? That's up to every manufacturer that's making the lenses to determine the granularity of the motors that they use for their aperture, whether it depends if it's a video design lens or a stills design lens, Cliff. So that's actually going to be a question that you would want to pose to Sigma, realistically there. Cool. All right. So there's still a ton of questions here. We're going to get back to them, but we've already been going for 27 minutes, so let's actually take a look at some of this cool stuff here. So I've got my GH6 hooked up here, or actually my S5 Mark II hooked up, and my GH6 is what we are focusing on the back. And the reason I'm doing it this way is if you've ever followed the stream and we've talked about RAW over HDMI, you know that I can't actually show you the menu if I were to plug the GH6 in over HDMI to a switcher, because RAW data can't be decoded by the, what am I using? An ATEM Mini now for this. Actually, I've been using that for quite some time. So I wanted to actually show you in the menu. So I'm going to have to kind of go slightly off camera here so I can reach. I'm a little starved for space on my desk right now. And we're going to show you what's actually in this camera, what's in the menus, and kind of show you where this RAW over HDMI system works. Because on the Lumix cameras, it's a bit different than some of the other manufacturers out there. So to start with, as many people know, the GH6 here has the ability to do 4K 120 frames per second in camera. You do this to the SD card, you can do it to the CF Express card, you can even, well, can't do it out to the SSD. However, what the camera has the ability to do is also have the RAW over HDMI functionality. So RAW over HDMI in our cameras is designed to be a very seamless activation for you, the user, when it's on your camera. Whether that means that you've got a camera with it pre-installed, or you've got a camera like the S5 Mark II that you may want to upgrade your camera to have the RAW over HDMI functionality. It is as simple as just turning this system on, selecting yes, and now the camera is set and sending a RAW signal out over HDMI based on what your rec quality settings are. Now the cool thing here is that on the GH6, the options are much greater than what you've seen on the previous cameras. So as an example here, we have a 4x3 30 frames per second HDMI RAW, so that's 5.7K. Here in a 4x3 ratio, which is the full sensor height and width, or about as close as you can get to the full sensor height and width. And this can now be sent out over RAW. So you get a huge benefit here on this camera if you want to capture RAW and you want to capture RAW open gate, in this case up to 30 frames per second. It does also offer it in 24 frames per second. And then this is where you get into the 17:9 aspect ratio options, and these are all, if you notice, full sensor area, or full sensor width. Now, with our RAW implementation, if you've not looked or worked with our cameras before, we take a fairly strict approach to what RAW video means in a camera. A lot of times you'll see cameras will come out and they will say that they shoot RAW video out over HDMI, and it'll be, say, 6K sensor resolution-wise like what we're working with, but you're still getting 4K in a full sensor width. And while that can be useful in some cases, there's an inherent problem with that approach. You have to process that image to then create the RAW out of it, because you have to take the 6K image, downscale it to the resolution that you're trying to output, and then send that out as a packaged RAW. That means that you're adding a processing layer into the pipeline. Our logic here is that if you want RAW, you're going to get RAW. That means that we are sending out, when you see here at 5.7K, it is doing the full sensor width in 17:9 in RAW. It is sending that data out. So this is technically, even though it says full, this is a quote-unquote pixel-to-pixel read, because you are doing the full sensor width. But then when we drop down to something like the 4.3K here, or 4.4K, at 4:3 ratio and things up to 60 frames per second, you'll notice that this changes to pixel to pixel. This means that we are using actually 4352 by 3264 in pixels, so from the center of the frame, so if you're coming from the video side or the cinema side that's windowing the sensor, to get to 60 frames per second, to get that faster readout, and to get that 4:3 aspect ratio in RAW for the data that goes out. So yes, you lose maybe a little bit of field of view because you're going to be cropping in on the sensor here, but you're getting an actual RAW image out of it. And if you've worked with like the S5 Mark IIX or any of our, realistically the S5 Mark IIX, the camera that I think a lot of people have been working with that's on the newer platform, you'll see that the results are really solid out of this camera, even when you're using the pixel-to-pixel readouts, which is going to show up in anything that's in the 4K option. So that'll be 17:9 is the aspect ratio that we use for RAW over HDMI. Now the coolest thing here is that while yes, we've been able to do 4K 120 RAW over HDMI for some time now, utilizing the Atomos Ninja 5 Plus, we now also have the ability to do 4K 120 frames per second RAW video out over HDMI to the Blackmagic Video Assist. The Video Assist, obviously, you got your B-RAW, you got your various different compression ratios, you have the newer processing with it, thanks to the new engines that we're working with on these cameras, and it gets you a much closer to a true RAW performance that you can get out of a current-day camera. And on top of it, it's a camera that can do 4K 120 frames per second or 4K 100 frames per second, depending on the region that you're in B-RAW. Which, last I checked, there's only a handful of cameras, and we're one of the only outside cameras from Blackmagic that support it when using their external recorder. So if you're someone who really loves Blackmagic RAW, you've got a lot of really cool tools in here to work with it. You get a really solid number of aspect ratios and resolutions and frame rates to work with, and you're getting that 4K 120 for RAW if you were looking to utilize that as well. So that's not really all when it comes to capturing RAW over HDMI. With our system, like I said, once you turn that switch on to have HDMI RAW video data output turned on, the system is designed to be seamless for you. So whether or not you're an Atomos user or you're a Blackmagic user, you just plug your monitor in. It will know what to do. So it will take either, once you plug in a Ninja 5 or Ninja 5 Plus, it's going to say, hey, I know that you're going to accept ProRes RAW. Here you go. If I plug in the Video Assist, it says, hey, you're Blackmagic RAW. Here you go. And it's formatted properly for those different recorders. You don't have to go in and say, hey, which RAW format do I want to shoot this time? This way, if you're someone that, and I've had a few people actually bring this up, if you're someone who jumps back and forth between the different RAW formats because of either a client or a job you're working on, or you just like to play around with both of them because it's fun, you don't have to think about it. You just plug the monitor in that you want to use, and you're good to go. Golden. Really set there. Let me jump back, check a few more of these questions before we continue on here. As a reminder, if you have questions, tag at Lumix USA. I'm going to do my best to get through as many of them as I can as we go through this conversation. The next thing that we're going to be actually talking about on my side here is we're going to talk about the way you set your camera up once you have RAW over HDMI out so that it's seamless for triggering your recording. So let's see here. Let's see here. Rhett says, so all cameras that can do RAW can do ProRes and be RAW at this point, correct? If so, what's the benefit of one versus the other besides the NLE you use? So in general, I think that's a fair statement to make. I think on the most part, cameras that can do RAW can typically do ProRes. The lone exceptions, the S5 Mark II, that does not do ProRes. Internally, it can send a clean HDMI signal out to a recorder that can do ProRes, but besides that point, if you're working with the various different NLEs, so nonlinear editors or your color grading software, that in most cases that's going to be your line in the sand as to which flavor of RAW output you want to work with. If you're a Resolve user, you're going to go with BlackMagic RAW. If you're a Premiere user, your options are a little more open because BlackMagic RAW and ProRes RAW both have plugins to work with in Premiere. So if you're in Premiere, and I know there's a lot of people that don't like using Premiere for this stuff, I do, and I can easily just jump back and forth between them. I can mix clips, I can do whatever I want to do, and it's fine. If you are a Final Cut user, you are 99% of the time going to probably want to use ProRes RAW since it has the most direct integration for its controls. Since it's an Apple product, you're good to go there. As far as ProRes goes, a lot of this kind of just comes down to various different choices, right? If you're someone who doesn't need the large file sizes that RAW gives you, if you're someone that doesn't need to be able to tweak your ISO later or your exposure values later, if you don't really need to ever worry about your white balance shifting in post, you probably don't need to be shooting RAW. It's a cool thing to play around with, and I encourage you, if you've got the equipment to do it, play around with it. It's a really awesome way to learn more about the way the cameras work. But if you're a professional and you're making a ton of money, or even if you're starting out and you're trying to find an efficient way to make money on your cameras, or to make money in a living, this is where you have to actually look and say, well, does this job actually require me to use RAW? Or is ProRes a better option? Or, hell, even better, is the internal H.265 or H.264 option the better choice for what I need to do and where my deliverables are? That's why we build all of these choices into the cameras. That's why on the GH6, we've got ProRes internally to the CF Express cards. But you can also just shoot H.264 or H.265. Are you going to get different bit rates? Are you going to get different chroma subsampling? Yeah, they're all going to be a little different. But ultimately, it comes down to what it is that you're trying to shoot. Are you shooting ultra fast-paced motion? Well, you're probably going to want to prioritize an all-intra codec. Yes, the file sizes are going to be bigger, but they handle motion better. Are you someone who likes to have the highest quality that you can, that has probably the most ubiquitous compatibility in the industry? Well, ProRes is going to be that choice for you. ProRes really doesn't care what program you're going to throw it into. I believe, save for like Avid or some other programs that maybe are just a little more niche for the vast majority of people to work with. So if you're working for a client and you don't 100% know what it is that they're going to be working on, but you know that they're working with a decent, colorist or a decent firm for video editing, and you're just shooting to deliver, you may see that ProRes is the preferred option. If you're going to be doing, I apologize for my dog, it is raining, thundering out, and someone's coming up the stairs, so I apologize. If you're going to be doing something where, maybe it's more narrative work, you're going to be sitting there having a ton more control over lighting, you want to get a little more artistic with the shoot and the style, well, then RAW probably will actually be the better choice for you because you get all that control to it. So it's really up to you as the user to pick what works best. The benefits between the various different ones are all going to come down to more subjective situations here. How do you use it? What software do you work with? Those are usually the first barriers when you're deciding which one you want to work with. Let's see here. I have an old Canon Speedlight 300EZ flash, wondering if it works with the S52X. Afraid of mounting it in the shoe and causing electronics not matching or damaging the camera. Thoughts? It's actually a fairly good point to kind of keep an eye on. Camera flashes, it used to be, basic flashes were single pin trigger, so you would use the base pin in the middle is what would trigger the flash for your camera. And a lot of modern flashes are still designed to do that. However, I will say with some of the EZ flashes and some of the Canon Speedlights, you have to look at the base of it. There was a period there where some flashes were designed that they cannot work on other cameras because they don't have the center pin for triggering. If you're mounting a flash to a camera and you are not sure what it's going to do to your camera, there were old, back in the film days, we did have these little in-between pieces that you would put that were basically fuses. Because one, we had much higher powered flashes back then that just kind of would go all out in power. That piece would click onto your flash, go into the hot shoe on the camera, and this way, if there was ever a short that happened on either side, it's going to get caught in the fuse in the middle. I think Wayne was one of the companies that used to make them. I have no idea if they still make them. I have no idea if they're even really going to be worth it these days anymore. Highly recommended if you know that you really want to be doing flash work. I know bringing older flashes forward is it's a good economical way to kind of work, but if you are in a system, I do recommend using flashes that are designed for the pinout of the camera. Obviously, with the Lumix brand, we do make flashes. We do have a few of them available in the market. We do also have, there is compatibility with the Godox flashes that are for the Panasonic Olympus design. That I use day in, day out, never had a problem with. So best I can state is be cautious with other main brand flashes because you don't know exactly what their pinout is. Yeah. Let's see here. Tommy says, can I charge my S52X with a power bank? The power bank has a charge of 3.7 volt, or is it too risky? With power banks, the most important thing to look at for external USB battery banks is what the USB-C rating is on it. So this is one of the ones that we recommend for the camera. This is the PowerCore 26800. I think it's 26800. This thing is so beat up. The reason this is one of the recommended ones is because the USB-C port is rated for USB-C PD. That is the power spec for USB-C power delivery, which means that on the camera, it is, or once the camera's connected, it supplies 9 volt 3 amp. That will charge and power your camera while you're using it. Anything lower than that is going to charge when you have the camera turned off. Otherwise, you'll get a notice when the camera's running that it says, hey, you know, it just doesn't kind of, it's not going to charge while you're using the camera there. Let's see here. Thanks for, from Dennis. Thanks for the info. Comparing S1H to S52X B-RAW next to each other, the S52X's implementation seems to capture at least 2 to 3 more resolution. Engineers have done a fantastic job here. Yeah, our engineers with the new engine, the L-squared technology that we're working with, and what the new era is bringing for us gives us a lot more flexibility and functionality with these cameras. Unfortunately, it's that kind of point that a lot of the stuff that we're doing moving forward may not be backwards compatible with the older engines because it is a totally new ground-up design. It means, unfortunately, some of the cool stuff that we can do is just not possible on the older cameras. I know that no one likes to ever hear that, but unfortunately, that's kind of just a little bit of a challenge. Oh, cool. I see Matt is in the chat. So thank you, Matt. Matt is a great resource, my counterpart, Matt Fraser, to be able to answer some of the questions that maybe I can't answer. Maybe provide you guys some stuff there. All right, cool. So I wanted to go back to taking a look at the camera here. So like I had mentioned here, I've got the my S5 Mark II hooked up here, and I shifted this around a little bit so that I've got the user interface actually being shown over HDMI, because while we talked about RAW over HDMI and how you turn it on, how you get it set up, and what options you have, there's a major component that often is getting missed when people are plugging their cameras in and getting them all set up for this. And that is, well, unless you want to be taking the camera or taking the recorder and triggering it by pressing on the screen the record button, you want your camera to work so that when you press the shutter button on the camera, it sends the trigger information to the monitor and the monitor starts recording. And one of the things that you'll notice is that on my GH6 here, you'll see that I have an HDMI and a little pause icon right up in the top left corner under the Kelvin reading here. So what this is doing here is this is telling you that over HDMI, your start-stop functionality is activated and ready to work when a monitor is attached and set up correctly. So with this, the way you do it is, and let me turn the info display back on. The way you do this is a few steps that you want to make sure that you're taking here. So for one, I'm going to go into the camera menu, and we are in the video mode on this camera. We are going to, actually I was in the photo mode, lied, let me change this to the video mode. So we're going to be a black screen for a second, because I forget what, yeah, there we go. So a couple things you're going to do here. The first thing that you are going to do if you want to set this camera up so that you can trigger an external recorder is you're going to come down here to timecode. Now you want to make sure that here, that one, timecode display is turned on. So we have timecode on. And then you're going to come down here to where it says HDMI timecode output on. So by default, this will be turned off. You want to make sure that this is enabled and turned on. After that, you now want to go down into the HDMI rec output menu. So this is under the custom settings option here. It's under the in and out option and under HDMI rec output. Now from here, this is where you want to make sure HDMI recording control is also turned on. Once this is turned on, you'll now get this icon up in the top that says HDMI with the pause. If you turn any of those off, so if I turn HDMI rec control off, you'll notice on my main camera, it's gone. It's not there anymore. What that's telling you is that the camera in the current state, my GH6 is set up to do it, my S5 Mark II is not set up to do it right now. When I hit the shutter button, it's not going to send a signal to the recorder to say, hey, you should start recording right now. Once you turn this HDMI recording control turned on, you get that HDMI icon that you see in the top left there, and now your camera is ready that when you press the shutter button or you click the video record button, it will send the signal out over HDMI to the recorder to say, hey, time for you to record. But like I said, that's not the only things you have to do. That's how you get the camera set up. On your recorders, you will notice, and I'm going to use a Ninja 5 here for this demonstration. So I just got it booted up here. You'll notice that when you've got this monitor, or honestly any of them, I don't have my video assist with me at the moment, so I can't show you on that, but the principle is the same. You're going to take this recorder, and we'll put it up onto the screen, and you're going to have a number of different options here. One of them is going to be HDMI trigger. So for here, you want to make sure that that is set for triggering over HDMI, so you want to make sure that your source is set for HDMI, and then because I can't do this backwards, just make sure it's set to HDMI. You want triggering on, because there is another option in there also for timecode. In some of the older ones, I think you actually had to set it to timecode. This one's been set to HDMI and it's working fine. This is also the most up-to-date firmware for the Ninja 5. But make sure that you are setting where your triggering is coming from, that it's coming over HDMI, and that you're looking for either timecode or just HDMI and trigger turned on. That will make sure that you've got this set up so that when you press the record button on the camera, it sends a signal here and your monitor starts recording as well. Let's jump back at some of the questions that we see here, because I see some of the other questions here. Let's see here. John. It's hard to figure out how to set up live streaming on the S52X using the app. A useful feature is enabling monitoring LUT in the app. Any future videos on this topic? Yes. I am planning to do specifically an S5 Mark II live stream from the camera out in the field. The only problem is it's been like 100 to 105 degrees here in Austin, so it's been a little challenging to want to actually go out for an hour in the middle of the day and do the stream. I could do it from here, but my back porch it's hot. So, I prefer demoing that in a situation where you can tell I'm not using my computer, my setup here. We have done them in the past. Setting up the S5 Mark II-X is going to be identical to setting up the GH5 Mark II for wireless and wired streaming over the wireless connectivity. That was a bit redundant. But I will be planning on doing that. It's probably going to be a stream next month because I'm a little tied up for the rest of the month of July. But we will have a stream on that soon. If you subscribe, let us know. Drop that comment in this video afterwards. I'll work on making sure that I can get a better schedule for you with this. Animal says, do we get highlight recovery with BRAW from the GH6 like we do from the S5 Mark II-X? So at this point, you should be getting the highlight recovery on the GH6 in BlackMagic RAW when you're using the system. The issue is that I can't 100% confirm that one way or another exactly at this moment because, one, I've worked with an early build of it to check out, and I do not have DaVinci Resolve to work with that has compatibility. So that means that I don't have the ability to actually test it, show you, and be able to confirm. What I can show you is that when I look at... I'll go back into here. When I look at... This is S5 Mark II-X BlackMagic RAW footage here. What I can show you is that you'll see, this is in Premiere, you'll see that you do have the option here to change the decoding. So from camera to clip, and then you do have the ability to come in here and enable or disable highlight recovery. And as you change it, you see that this setup changes here for it as well. So you do have control to do it as well for BlackMagic RAW on the S5 Mark II-X. If you are in Premiere, that's how you would get it. And again, like I said, I am not the source for color grading and working that side of this, but you should have the same controls on the GH6 as you do here on the S5 Mark II-X. Let's see here. Okay, cool. So I want to kind of round out a bit here about raw stills capture, because we talked about the video still, or the video raw output over HDMI, how you get into it, you know, how it works, how you trigger it, some of the things to look out for. But raw still functionality is one of the things that, I'm going to say it, a lot of people underrate us in the photography side of our cameras. As someone who is primarily a photographer at heart, I have always been. Yes, I work a lot more now with video functionality. The stills raw performance on our cameras is pretty good. And that's putting it lightly. There's a lot of stuff I can do with our cameras that I've never been able to do with other cameras in the market. And for a little bit of a refresher here, before I worked for Panasonic, I worked for retail. I sold all of the different cameras, so I have a pretty good feel for how all of the other cameras worked, what their systems were, the general flexibility. Yes, it was a little while ago, but not a ton has changed over the years with the way stuff works. So with our cameras, as we've talked about in some of the other streams here, our cameras have a lot of functionality when it comes to control of your RAW files for stills. So if you're someone who is strictly working in this, you want to shoot our RW2 RAW files, know that the existing Adobe release for Adobe Camera Raw supports both the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark II-X. So you can start dropping these files in and work with them right away, no issues. But what's cool with it is that when you work in the Adobe suite for ACR, you get access to all of our color profiles. So this is that kind of point where if you've been working with a Lumix camera and you first import an image into the software and you notice that the profile is saying Adobe, well, that's because Adobe allows you to basically set stuff up so that by default, it's always going to use Adobe colors. It's going to use Adobe Standard, or I believe it used to be called, There's Adobe Color, and that's their interpretation of the information, what reds should look like, blues, the contrast, all that kind of stuff. But with us, we felt it was important to make sure that you have the actual raw control over your images and can get back to a start point that you had in the actual JPEGs that you shot in the camera. So if you're someone who loves to shoot in our monochrome profiles, say you like shooting in monochrome S because you like that softer, silkier black and white, you don't have to just choose the Adobe black and white or Adobe monochrome that's built into their particular software, or the Adobe standard that's the built-in, kind of default for it. I'm able to come in, I can actually come in here, camera matching, and pick of the ones that we've actually created for the camera, which ones you want to work with, and they're going to give you the start point that you have on the camera. So it's exactly profiled the same. But what's cooler about this too is that you do also have the ability to come in, go into your preferences, and where's my preference dialog box going to be opening up? Here it is. You'll see that you have an option here in Adobe called Global under the raw defaults. This lets you come in and say, do you want the Adobe default, which is how ACR works out of the box, or camera settings. Camera settings means it's going to read the information that's embedded in the raw file of what color profile you used, and it will apply that on import to your file. So this also means that, as anyone that's watched the stream for a while knows, that I have a very strong opinion about if you're shooting vlog as in stills for a color profile, you shouldn't do it, especially if you're going to shoot raw. There's zero benefit to it. You're making your work harder for you. The camera's not designed to expose the same way in vlog as it is in standard color profiles. But if you have that set, the camera settings option set in Adobe Camera Raw, and you bring a raw file into Lightroom or Photoshop or Lightroom Classic, whatever program you're using that uses ACR, if you have that set to camera settings, you will get a vlog option here in this particular setup, because it is such a vastly different performing color profile. The trade-off there is that while, yes, in some cases, if you're not using this and you're using Adobe Standard or whatever comes out of the box by default in Adobe, you're going to notice that that image is going to be really dark, it's going to be underexposed, you're going to have to lift your shadows up and do all of this extra work to it. So there is a little bit of a safety net there for vlog shooting in RAW. However, you're still compressing your dynamic range into the middle of the histogram, and you're not really going to get the same looking image that you can out of just shooting in standard and processing a RAW file as an actual standard RAW file out of the camera. So that's why we build all of these in. So you've got that ability to just jump through, change all of these different color profiles that you want. If you come in and you use some of the different profiles that are created by, different users out there, you can come in and apply those just like you want on anything else. But probably one of the cooler things here is that we do have, and I talked about this, I believe, last week as well, we do also have the ability that if you are using the camera where you want to utilize the aspect ratios in the S series cameras and the G series cameras, all except the multi-aspect ratio sensors, so the GH5S, you have the ability to still capture the full sensor height and width in that still image and have it just flag for your aspect ratio in post. Because I know a lot of users have looked at our brand, they, think of us more as a video-oriented product. I know a lot of users may overlook that as something that we're able to do. But we do have that functionality to be able to come in and adjust even down to, you want to make a change later on for your aspect ratios. It is built in here, so you're not always stuck with the aspect ratio that you've created from day one. All right, cool. Let's take a look at a couple more questions here. I've seen that the photographic dynamic range on the GH5 Mark II is better than the GH6, even in video without DR boost. What's the reason for this? Sorry if this is a hard question. Well, it's not actually true, really, that the GH6 has better dynamic range than the GH5 Mark II has better dynamic range than the GH6. Depends on where you're looking. And it looks like a couple other people have been going back and forth here as well. It depends on where you're looking for dynamic range. The GH6 with dynamic range boost is getting around an extra stop of highlight information. So that means that, yes, if you start underexposing heavily, you may see a difference there. Because one, GH6 is higher resolution, so you're doing more pixels. GH5 Mark II may perform a little bit better in certain scenarios where you're massively underexposing. But in general, the GH6 is going to provide you a better image because you've got an extra stop-ish of highlight latitude to work with when using DR boost. So it's all going to depend on how you're exposing and what you work with. In the end, I can only straightforward say, use the camera that works for you. If it's a GH5 Mark II, that's awesome. If it's an S5 Mark II, that's awesome. If you love the GH6, cool. You're gonna get the BlackMagic RAW support on it as well, and that's pretty awesome. Let's see here. Kudo says, is there a way to assign my menu to one of the function buttons? It would be super convenient. You mean to just drop into my menu? If I'm understanding, you mean to be able to go into this menu option here? There actually is a very easy way to do it. You don't even have to lose a custom function button for it. Go down to display from my menu and turn this on after you've got it set up. Now every time you press the menu button, it's going to display from the my menu option here. That basically means you don't have to click a button, go down. You don't have to lose an FN button because you just want it to go to my menu when you have a menu button on the camera already. Just remember, if you don't want to use it anymore, go to display from my menu and turn that off. Let's see here. Zizo, can you get metadata in video codecs other than RAW, like white balance or focal length for reference? On the GH6, if you are shooting in ProRes and you have the camera set up for the... I moved a whole bunch of stuff, so I hope this is still here. Let me turn the HDMI display off on this here. Let's go here, just so you can see this a little bit clearer. If you're on the GH6 and you go into the settings here, you'll see that you have the ability to change Cine file naming, or video file name, and you can change it to Cine style. It's going to tell you here, Cine style, use 48 gig or larger memory cards. That basically means you need to be using an SDXC memory card or greater to make this work, or CF Express. But what this allows you to do, one, is it allows you to do camera index name and camera number, so you can keep track of the cameras on a shoot. But also, when you're shooting in ProRes with this camera, if you bring it into a metadata reader for video, like Media Info is one of the ones I use, you will get the information. It depends on how the formatting is, if the metadata software, like where it puts the information because of how it's reading its own string out. But you can get some of the basic information. I believe it does tell you the white balance, the focal length. Remember that in video, your white balance is going to be whatever the first white balance was that you started recording. So that's what the white balance is going to report at. If you change white balance in the middle of a shoot, it's not going to record that. But it does record some of the metadata for you there. I think it records and tells you the lens that was on there, but it's been so long since I looked at it. But RAW obviously does give you that information as well because it needs it. But yeah, so hopefully that kind of helps you. Sacred says, are you guys going to be at the B&H thing at Javits in New York City? I don't know if Matt or I will be there, but we'll keep you updated, obviously, as we get closer to that event. What's the best color profile to take photos? This one, you're going to think this is a cop-out answer, whichever one you like. Best is a subjective term here. Objectively, it does not matter what color profile you use, especially when you're shooting in RAW, because you can pretty much make any color look like anything in RAW, for the most part. It's not a foolproof way to shoot, just as a heads up. But a lot of it's going to depend on what it is that you want to capture. Are you looking for 100% true to real life look on the camera? Or are you looking for, do you want things that have maybe a little bit more vibranty blues and greens, and you want red to maybe pop a little more? the different color profiles are going to give you those various different looks onto the way the image works. What's cool about the newer cameras, and this is going to depend on, what camera you're on, but like I have an S5 Mark II hooked up here. The cool thing is that in the newer cameras, we've added the real-time LUT functionality. Let me move this so you can actually... Oh, no. I actually set it up right already. Sorry about that. You've got a couple different options here. For one, even in the photo mode, you have the real-time LUT functionality. And let me change this into the photo options here, because it looks a little bit better. So yeah, you have standard, vivid, natural, and you're going to see various different levels of contrast added in with the Cine D, Cine V for more video-oriented, 709. The Vlog for stills, again, I do not recommend shooting Vlog for stills. Just kind of don't do it. You do have real-time LUT in stills, and remember that real-time LUT is based off of Vlog, so if you're someone that shoots RAW plus JPEG, this may not be the best way to go to get the look that you're going for if you know that you're going to need that RAW file. But what we do have here is you have my photo styles. My photo styles in our cameras offer you the ability to take a base color profile, in my case standard here, and then I can come down here and I can apply a LUT on top of that particular color profile. So, what does this mean for you? Well, if you take a look at the video that I did a number of weeks ago, where we talk about real-time LUT, you have the ability to use a program like Photoshop, where you can edit in layers and create your own looks to load onto this camera. Photoshop has the ability to kick out a 33-point LUT for your camera. It's going to come out in a .cube file, so that means you want to make sure that you're using a SDXC card for that, so the higher capacity cards. This means that I can shoot in whatever profile I want. Just remember what your base profile was that you started on. So in this case, like if we go back to my example here, I've got my motorcycle here looking in landscape right now. So if I've got this shot set in landscape and I do my editing in Photoshop, not in Lightroom, but in Photoshop, and edit these different controls here, so contrast, highlight, shadow, all of this kind of stuff. If you edit it as layers, a little bit older school way of working these days, I can then have Photoshop kick that out as a LUT named how I want based on, in this case, camera landscape. So then when I take this and put it back into my camera and load this into the LUT library, I now have the ability to come in, say, I want this under landscape. So we'll go to landscape. And then I want to come in here and load the LUT that I created on my computer onto this camera, which is going to give you a right out of the camera edit of the way that you edit your photos when you bring them onto the computer. So the cool thing here is that it saves you that RAW file still. You're not having to worry about, which RAW format that I use, which base profile that I use. Do I have to use automation in Photoshop or Lightroom to do this? If you're happy with how that image comes right out of the camera as the JPEG, awesome, cool, ready to go. It's already graded for you. But your RAW file at least is still that backup as the actual color profile that you used when you were creating the image. So when you put it into your software, you get to have that work the way you want it. Dennis says, for real-time LUT, you need to use exposure index LUTs that let the image appear underexposed by at least one stop. So you need to compensate by overexposing Vlog, will result in much cleaner images. I am going to leave that one up to you, because that's very far past what my personal experience is on this stuff. So, let's see here. These are profiles that are my names. This is the camera I use, Matt. We have no association with any of the LUTs or anything that are used on here. These are just things that have been created and commercially available online from others out there as looks that they've created and put onto the cameras. Dennis, or FC says, for MP4 file format with AAC audio on the GH6, is it 2-channel or 4-channel? I believe MP4 is going to be 2-channel. I don't think MP4 has 4-channel. I'm not sure, Matt, if you have a quick way to check that, but I don't have my XLR1, and I don't have any card in my camera to actually pull in and check at this point. But FC, yeah, we will check on that one for you. So, all right, cool. So it is already 9 after, and unfortunately, I do have to actually call it today. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully, Matt and I were able to get to many of your questions. If I wasn't able to, hopefully Matt was able to get to your question. Thank you, Matt, for jumping into the chat. It's awesome that, you know, there's this support level here. And again, everybody, this is what these streams are about. I've got some cool little demo stuff that I want to show you, and for some people that's boring. For other people, you're here to actually be able to interact with us. So I try to mix this in so that each of us have the ability to get a little bit out of this. Whether it's, you know, you're someone who likes to chat or you're someone who likes to see the demos. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully this maybe sparked a little bit of an interest in some of the different things that we're doing on these cameras. And I don't know why I'm ending this so quick, because there is something I completely forgot. I am so sorry about that. We are going to go back to my camera here real quick, because I forgot two of the coolest things on the GH6 with the new firmware update. And I'm so stupid for just completely forgetting it, because I actually set up an entire demo to show y'all. And I can run a little late to the next thing I want to do, just because I like y'all so much. All right, so let's put this back into A mode here so that I can actually see what we're doing. Let's change this back to 709. There we go. All right, so we're looking at the back of my GH6. So I talked about this. A little while ago, actually. And that is that one of the other cool things that's been added to the cameras as a kind of update to the system here is we've added a capability in the camera called, where is it? It's under settings. Why are all my colors so messed up? Whatever. We've added a cool option here under the playback menu here called video repair. Now, we talked about this before, that there are sometimes situations where you may have a situation where your battery gets kicked out, you drop an SD card gets ejected from a camera for whatever reason. But typically these would be power drop issues on the camera. Well, they can cause corrupt video files, and it's the leading cause of corrupt video files. So, this would be one of those kind of weird situations, right? And I'm sorry I got distracted by the doing a Steve Jobs. Yeah, but one more thing. So yes, we've added video repair, and I started talking about this a couple weeks ago, but I wanted to actually show y'all what this does. So video repair allows you to go in, and it's being added to the GH6 as well in the new firmware update. And I purposely corrupted this video file here by recording and popping the SD card out. So if you're recording and you stop the recording, it's going to cause a corruption on here. Like I said, this can happen with an SD card being popped out. It can happen with an external power source that gets pulled from the camera in the middle of recording. This can happen when you use third-party batteries that don't have the ability to tell the camera, hey, I'm low on battery, maybe you should close the video file. It's one of the reasons why we're so adamant about power solutions on these cameras. So, what you have here is this file right now. It's a 14-second video clip that is corrupted. And the system says here, select which video repair with the left and right button to figure out which one you want. And right now, it scanned the card and found the one that I corrupted here. All I have to do to repair it now, for the most part, this is not going to be a perfect solution. There can be other things that happen in the cameras or cause the corruption that maybe the camera can't fix. If you've ever run into corrupt files, you know that there isn't always a solution to fix them, so just take that as a caveat. But now I can just click set, say yes. It's going to tell you that you should power the camera over USB or run a DC-AC coupler to run this solution here. This is a short enough one, so I'm just going to use it on the battery that's in the camera. Highly recommended to power the camera via USB or an external power source. DMW, DCC17, and AC10, which would be a good idea to have them for this camera anyway. And then you're just going to click Proceed. So what this will do now is it says Video Repair in Progress. It's going to give you a recommended time and say like, hey, this should take about a minute to repair. You get a status icon here, and it's just going to kind of run through, and it's going to do what it can to repair the video file. Now, a couple things with this. You want to make sure that you have a video clip before or after that one is corrupted that's shot with the same, settings that you used on it. For a couple of things, it's good to have the reference clip, and you want to make sure that you try to make the reference clip longer than 10 seconds. Really short video clips, there's no guarantee that you can recover them. But as you can see here in the camera, it now says video repair completed. So if I click OK, you'll see I now have 2 video clips here. Both of them, these were shot at the 4K 120. Obviously not paying attention for exposure because these are just to show you if something fails. There you go. Cool. So the last thing, legitimately the last thing that I want to show you all today is one of the cool things that's coming with the update as well. And that is the HDMI out specification that we pointed out here, which is the 4K 120 output option on this camera. So while yes, we talked about that we have 4K 120 for RAW and for BlackMagic RAW and ProRes RAW, we now also will have the capability to output a true 4K 120 frames per second video feed out over HDMI. At this moment, I don't know of any recorders that actually take a video feed in over HDMI at 4K 120. I know that a lot of the recorders like the Ninja 5 Plus do it for ProRes RAW. But in this case, you've got 4K 120p output over HDMI on this particular camera. With this, because I've got a couple other things set up, and actually, I forget what mode I'm in here. I have RAW turned on. This allows you to be able to send that signal out. So if I plug this into, say, my TV and I turn the 4K 120 output on, it's going to send a 4K 120 signal into my display here that I'm using as my computer. It's a 48-inch OLED. But also, if I've got a monitor that I'm using for client review, if I'm shooting in 4K 120, if eventually a recorder ever does come out, you'd be able to record to it. But as Matt points out also, as far as I know, there are no recorders at this point to do 4K 120 as a video signal out over HDMI. So, with that, those are the last 2 things that I wanted to make sure I show. So, that's the last of it. Thank you all so much. Again, as I started to say earlier, thank you, Matt. Thank you for jumping in the chat. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around even after I kind of preemptively started to end the stream. If you liked the video, give us a like. If you liked what you saw here and you're not subscribed already, I know actually a very large number of you are subscribed here on the channel. If you think this video warrants a subscription from you, please subscribe. It's free. It only helps us. If you know someone who's been looking for this kind of information, share the video out to your friends. And most importantly, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have recommendations, drop the questions in the chat. Or not in the chat, in the actual comment section after this video. If you've noticed the last couple of videos, there's a lot more comments in the actual video after it's posted. That helps us with the algorithm, that helps these streams get picked up to a bigger audience, shows more engagement in the channel, and if you feel that we've deserved it, thank you all so much. And yeah, we will be back next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern time. And again, I hope you all have an awesome weekend, and I hope you go out there and create some cool stuff. See you next week.